by really sticking to our knitting. And, we tell our sales guys, don't, there's a little internal joke, don't go chasing enterprise. Like, don't do it. We're not going to support it. And I think that it's hard and it requires discipline, but I truly believe that there is a chronically underserved segment of the market that if we stick to our knitting, we're really uniquely positioned to be able to serve well.
Hello, welcome to another episode of SaaS Scaled, and I'm here with a very good guest actually that from one aspect would be very special, and that's the attention they have on a domain and a market that people are afraid of that market and don't want to get there and make it work. Andrew, welcome to the show. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and what you guys do.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So as you said, I'm Andrew Stern. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Quilt, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I live here in New York City with my wife and my rescue dog, who I would be happy to spend the rest of the podcast talking about. But we're here to talk about Quilt, which is a company that serves software for small independent specialty retailers. And as you pointed out, we are really perhaps bucking a trend by focusing on the small part of that. Our average stores per customer is 1.1. So, we have 19,000 customers and, average of 1.1 stores per customer. So we really are talking about the little mom and pop, the shops that line the main streets of America, the music shops and the thrift stores and pet food stores. And yeah, we serve them well, we think. Happy to talk about it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Logically, if you think about really a small versus larger transactions and think about number of transactions to be a small and large, there are only 2 cases out of 4 logical cases that are successful. Either you have to really, practically, of course, everyone wants to sell as, the average deal size to be larger possible and the number of transactions to be more. But logically and practically, either you position yourself in a smaller deal, but a lot of them to be successful, or you go after larger deals, but not so many of them to be successful. And to be honest with you, it's easier to make it work on this ladder. So you go after 200K, 500K deals, and then you close a few of them, and then you have a good quarter versus like you guys do, thousands of customers at a very small kind of number, and still you have to, you could make it really successful. What is the secret sauce there, and how do you guys do it, and how do you think about it?
Well, so you're absolutely right. I will say that the advantage of having thousands and thousands of small deals is as you get to scale, the law of large numbers kicks in and it becomes very easy to predict your business, right? So, there was an ongoing joke with me and my CFO in the early days when I would ask how the month was going, and he would say, Andrew, just like last month, because, you don't know exactly where you're going to get the hundreds and hundreds of logos every month, but again, just as you get better at predicting, every dollar of marketing is going to produce a certain number of leads, is going to produce a certain number of demos, is going to produce a certain number of closes. And at scale, that becomes very, very predictable, which honestly makes it really nice to run the business. Because when you have predictability, you can make investments and you can hire people and you can, you can really play off that predictability. So I will put in that plug for serving the small guys. But I will also acknowledge that it is not for everyone. And to the point you were making, you really have to commit, right? You don't want to be a company that's tooled for small businesses trying to serve someone large, and you certainly don't want to be, someone tooled for serving larger customers, trying to apply that to the tiny shop on the corner.
Yeah, no, definitely that's the big plus, the predictability. But also in general, when you are really serving a real need of the market and you have built a good, profitable, growing subscription business That's invaluable. That's great. That's really fantastic. Everybody dreams about it. Now, in your case, since the deals are smaller, building that subscription business and leading it to either be profitable in the future or profitable today, but growing, that's something that is not easy to do because you have to add a lot of small deals to get where you want. But you know that every quarter, every year, you are better than the previous year because you're just adding to these subscriptions. Uh, is it fair to say that requires more investment, more money to get there because you are targeting a smaller deals? Or from your perspective, no, it's an independent factor?
I don't think it requires more. I mean, I think, look, historically, one of the knocks on serving small businesses is the customer acquisition cost, right? Or I guess
Mhm.
more specifically, the customer acquisition cost, against the long-term value, right? The CAC to
Yeah.
LTV. Um, it does require some scale to get that CAC to LTV down.
Mhm.
We have done that at Quilt. We've kind of reached the point where we have a very, very efficient machine for for generating those leads, for creating efficiency, if you will, within that
Sure.
marketing and sales
Mhm.
funnel. Um, but there is, I think there probably is some upfront investment required to do that. Um, but once you make that and once you have a machine that's really efficient, it's actually, one of the things we've learned is that it's relatively easy for us to enter new segments because, serving a pet food store or a jeweler is very, very similar to serving a music shop or a thrift store
Mhm.
or a knitting store. And so we're able to kind of, yes, they require a slightly different message about the unique value
Mhm.
proposition for the software for that segment, but it's, that script can be dropped into the exact same machine that is creating content to generate leads, to generate a call, to generate a demo. And we're
Mhm.
basically just feeding slightly different versions of the same script into that machine, and we're able to, we think we can serve kind of n different industries, right? There's not like a theoretical limit to how many segments we can serve because we built this machine that's capable of serving them now quite efficiently.
So, in other words, what you say, what I hear is that the first segment to really, uh, you know, be successful in that segment is the most difficult one. The second segment you add, the third segment you add. As you go forward, you can make it faster, even if it's not easier, but you can make it faster to go after other segments and add it. Now it brings us to the question that which segment did you start when you started? How did you decide that this is the segment, let me focus on it? Or maybe you started with more generic application and then you specialized and separated the segments. Which way?
No, we did start in one. So the very first customer of our very first product was in fact a quilt store. So that's
Hmm.
partially where the name comes from. Um, but what we quickly realized was that, as I said, the needs of these small mom and pop shops are very, very similar. And we went from, while quilt stores do have specialized needs. So, for instance, they need serialized inventory, which is a very specific kind of software, and they need the ability to manage and run classes. And, there's kind of integration with some of their industry catalogs. There are very specific requirements, but we realized that quilt stores were actually quite similar to craft stores and knitting stores. And then we realized those were actually quite similar to music stores and jewelry stores. And so as the software expanded and our ability to serve expanded, we started acquiring other specialized software platforms. And again, once we had that machine, it turns out it's the same sales motion, the same go-to-market machine to serve cheese shops and liquor stores and carnicerias and Indian spice shops and kosher delis, right? So uh, that was sort of how we wound up building the business. Yeah.
Hmm, fascinating. Now, uh, would be a kind of a time from your perspective that uh, you can go back and take all of these kind of specialized domains and then introduce your next generation of software or application that essentially unify a lot of functions based on all of the experience you had? And how do you see, now that we cannot not talk about this topic, AI is coming, how do you see that can also play a role in the kind of coming generations of your software as you serve thousands of customers every day?
Yeah, we're pretty excited, honestly, about the ability of AI to both help our customers and also help us serve our customers. So, one of the things that we did really early on that unified all of our solutions was we have behind the scenes, customers don't see it, but behind the scenes, we have something called Quilt IQ that's just a data layer that normalizes
Mhm,
every piece of
mhm,
information we know about all of our
mhm,
customers. So, regardless of what point of sale software they might be using, we've got completely normalized data about all of their transactions, their usage, all of our CRM data, all of our financial data, et cetera. And this allows us to, one, run the kind of efficient machine that we talked about. But, and frankly, that's why we built it, because we knew we needed a strong underlying data layer. What it has turned out is that that is incredibly invaluable for building agentic AI solutions. Again, both for us to make us more efficient. So we've got, call deflection in our support teams and knowledge bases and predictive analytics for churn and stuff like that, but also the ability to create solutions for our customers. So we rolled out, I guess last year, it's 2026 now, we rolled out in 2025 a marketing assistant that's kind of an agentic
mhm,
marketing solution for our customers. And again, these are very, very small customers. They can't afford, certainly to have a full-time marketing person, but even some of the, expensive point marketing CRM type solutions. But bundling into our software a like pretty good, tightly integrated agentic marketing AI is really, really powerful for them. And we're going to continue to roll things like that out for them to help them with inventory, to help them with operations, to help them with personnel. So we're pretty excited about that.
That's great. Now you talked about, of course, services added to the software. So even that the software you're getting subscription for, but at the same time, do you see, or maybe you are doing right now, also providing them or selling them intelligence, selling them data in a way, meaning that, for example, benchmarking something. And then if I'm one of the 1,000 customers in this particular vertical, without, of course, sharing anybody's data with anybody
Yep.
else, but providing some kind of benchmarks that I know in my industry from which aspects I'm above average or below average and what things are happening. That would be very valuable. Are those kind of things that also, from your perspective, is either today or future in addition to software?
I do think it's in the future, and I think an important distinction. One of the things we learned early on is that selling reports back to our customers or selling data back to our customers is not
Mhm,
interesting to them, because again, they're not. This isn't Coca-Cola or I guess Walmart
mhm.
or Macy's,
Yeah.
right? There's no one really to be the customer for that. Um, but if we can give them actionable and context specific information based on that data, that's very valuable to them. So a, liquor industry pricing report, not very interesting, but a pricing agent that tells them, hey, you're selling Johnny Walker Blue at, 20% less than, or 20% more, or whatever, you're priced differently than similar size stores in, locations with similar demographics, right? Or your turnover of these types of products is a lot lower than average for similar stores, right? Giving them like really actionable intelligence is something that they're excited about. So we're looking forward to rolling that. Pricing is a real example. That's something we actually do in the product today, but we're looking at rolling out more of those kind of um, AI based insights rather than reports.
That's great. Uh, the company has grown nicely. Now you are, adding more customers. The company is pretty established at this moment. How the landscape has changed from your perspective as CEO today, the challenges you have compared to maybe early years of the business, or not very early years of the business, but maybe a few years, some years ago.
I think that a constant challenge, and one that I've just been thinking about this initial question you asked me of really sticking to our knitting with the small businesses. As we get larger, we are exposed to much more opportunities, and frankly, we probably have the capacity to serve larger and larger customers.
Mhm.
But bringing this back to where it started, I I do think that there's a huge opportunity to stick to the small guys
Mhm.
because of exactly what you said in the beginning of our conversation, which is that inevitably most software companies drift up market, right? Which is not like an insight of mine. This is, Clay Christensen wrote about this 30 years ago with Innovator's Dilemma, right? That typically software starts with lower end customers because they're supposedly less sophisticated and you have a less mature product. And then as you are able to chase those larger deals, and as you said, like, oh my gosh, I can get a $300,000 deal, I can get a 500, I can pay for the quarter, I can make payroll, with one deal. It's very tempting to go after those large deals, and we get those opportunities all the time from sales guys that say, oh my God, I can close out my entire quota this quarter. I can get a 50 location deal. I can get a 70 location deal. And because of that, frankly, I think the little guys are chronically underserved, because the software, all the best software just sort of drifts away from them over time.
Exactly.
Um, and so I think by really sticking to our knitting, and we tell our sales guys don't, there's a little internal joke, don't go chasing enterprise. Like
Mm.
like don't do it. We're not going to support it. And I think that it's hard and it requires discipline, but I truly believe that there is a chronically underserved um, segment of the market that if we stick to our knitting, we're really uniquely positioned to be able to serve well.
Yeah, no, well said, because it is tempting. And as you grow, you may want to, bring bigger size deals that you can. Now you're more established, software is more sophisticated. But as you said, this can kind of, in a way, distract you from the core that you have, and lose the audience. But how do you keep up with kind of so many different segments and stay focused on all of them? So for example, jewelries don't come and say, oh, jewelry shops say, the software hasn't been, really improved that much for us anymore, but you are paying attention to maybe bakeries, for example, or some other types of businesses and retailers that those are, getting a lot of attention. How do you really kind of, keep that equal and kind of distributed in the right way from your side?
Yeah. Well, so there's two questions there, right? One is how do we think about just running the business and allocating, a dollar of capital across the different segments we serve? And the answer to that is really what we call Quilt IQ. So we look at the business, every day, every week, every month. We're able to look at it across all the different segments that we serve and see, how are we doing in jewelry? How are we doing? How'd that trade show go? And it's all normalized, and we have a very good hierarchy of management that we have two business units and they're passionate about each of their business units,
Mhm.
and within that we have vertical leaders that are passionate about the segments that they serve. So there's a good kind of market dynamic internally for allocating capital. As far as updates, I would actually challenge the premise. Like, I think we're actually much better positioned to serve those customers because of our scale. So for instance, that marketing assistant, I mean,
Mhm.
that was like a multi-million dollar, multi-year investment for us to roll that out. The
Yeah.
individual jewelry platform, or I'll pick on our smallest segment, dive shops. Like, there's 1,900 dive shops in the US, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's very hard to make huge disruptive, when there are major changes in technology, whether it's SaaS or AI or whatever comes next. that takes millions of dollars and years to kind of keep up with that. That's very hard
Hmm.
to justify for a market with 1,900 merchants. But when we can do that centrally and roll that out across our platforms, we can make it work, and we can give those merchants access to the kinds of tools that are typically reserved for the bigger guys, the bigger markets. But because it's fractionally shared across all of our segments, we're able to bring, I think, kind of best of breed innovative solutions to market.
Uh, do you normally? I should have studied about it before, but I didn't. So I don't know if you guys only serve the U.S. market, North America or U.S. market, or you are international.
It's North America today. I will say I know that we have customers internationally. Actually, dive shops is a good example where I know there are a lot of dive shops in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean that use our solution. But for the most part, we're U.S. dollar and English language, and so we're serving the vast majority of our customers are North America.
And is it something that, from your perspective, that's one of the next opportunities to expand geographically to other areas and regions?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was very intentional. We are just, as you build a company, you have to sort of pick your battles, right? And
Sure.
be good at fewer things. So we had a very intentional choice to focus on North America, just to kind of get ourselves to scale. And as we talked about earlier, kind of build this machine that can overcome some of the traditional um, customer acquisition cost challenges and really build it up to scale. And now the potential to take that to other geographies um, I think it's a huge opportunity for us.
Yeah. So as a SaaS company that you're running your software, the infrastructure cost is one of the problems that many SaaS companies have. Because before COVID, it was going down, and it was economy of a scale that AWS was talking about, and actually services were getting cheaper every quarter. But then COVID happened, and then a lot of demand, and then, of course, then some other things happened, and then prices started moving up. Now, from your perspective, outside even your company's perspective, but in general, thinking about SaaS, how do you see the infrastructure costs for SaaS companies can play a role, especially in a domain that they're very cost sensitive? For a retail shop, even a small amount of money moving up is they're very sensitive. But at the same time, if the infrastructure cost is moving up, that would be added pressure for SaaS companies to say, okay, we don't know, we are squeezed here in between. What's your take on that and the future you see from infrastructure costs and working with more AWS and Azure and GCP and those kind of companies? Do you see that some changes have to happen in order for SaaS companies to succeed, or do you think it's good enough situation and everything looks okay, fine, no problem?
So far we are not seeing a squeeze from infrastructure costs.
Hmm.
We're very opportunistically, consolidating our platforms and introducing efficiencies. So for us, we are in the fortunate position of not being in a kind of low margin business. However, you asked, sort of taking a step back, what do I think about the industry? I do think the the real challenge in the future around infrastructure costs is the computational costs of the AI solutions that are
Hmm.
becoming, we're excited about them now, and they're exciting, shiny new features, but frankly, they're going to be table stakes for software solutions over the next decade. And the computational cost of delivering those is hidden right now, right? Like, we are getting massively subsidized essentially by these industry giants pouring billions, and I think I've seen some figures that it's getting close to trillions of dollars
Yeah.
into the kind of AI infrastructure, which frankly we're able to take advantage of and leverage without really seeing the true cost of it. So I think that's a much more interesting and frankly existential part of the cost equation, rather than Amazon costs that like might or might not be growing, but aren't really they're at the end of the day, they're not an important part of our bottom line.
Hopefully AI wouldn't be another drug that we get addicted to and then the price moves up.
Well, exactly. That's the concern, right?
Okay. I would like to ask you a totally different question, not relevant to what we discussed today, but it's a fun question. I normally ask the guests of the show that out of all of the cities that you have been, there, and you have traveled and you have seen it, and you have very nice memories of that city, which city would you recommend me if I wanted to go and just take a 2-week vacation and visit? Any city that you liked.
2-week vacation in any city that I liked. Well, I have to be careful because of the podcast. I don't want to draw everyone to my favorite little undiscovered places. So I will give a very uninteresting answer, which is my wife and I went to Paris last year, and we're remarking to each other, it's pretty hard to beat Paris. There's a reason that it is the cliche most beautiful city in the world to visit, and it is well deserved. So I'll give you a very unoriginal but incredibly defensible answer that you can't go wrong spending a few days in Paris.
And what was the best part of it? It was food. It was the nature part of it. People.
The food. Definitely the food. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't get a bad meal in Paris. So yeah. And in particular, again, unoriginally, I will say that the bread and just generally the pastries, pretty unbelievable.
Yeah. And then my last question would be about a book that you would like to, recommend it to the audience because you either personally or professionally like that book and it was impactful to what you do.
I will say, keeping on our theme, I will say a book that's, I think the only book we have floating around the office, at least in our headquarters in New York, is a book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid by C.K. Prahalad. It was very influential to me early in my career. I lived in India and I was working on how to market to or how to serve small rural communities in the Indian countryside. And this book, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, very compellingly made the case that while individually, small and without a lot of discretionary income, collectively, the small rural population in India was a huge opportunity. Now, while not directly applicable to small merchants in the U.S., particularly, I went back and flipped through it. And I was like, we can't actually apply these specific principles. But the idea of there being a fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, I think, was very influential to me early in my career, and is obviously evidenced in kind of how we're choosing to drive the company today.
Great. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Andrew. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.